A question I get by atheists sometimes when I do debates, and I've done 99 professors I've debated now, they'll say, well, doesn't the Green River Formation in Wyoming prove the Earth is millions of years old? There's a good article in one of the old creation magazines. I recommend the magazine. I disagree with a couple things on them, but disagree with everybody on something except me. But it's really good, from Australia. They've got a good article about the Green River Formation if you want to read that. Go to answersingenesis.org. You can get their website. I get their order the magazine, about $22 a year, I think. The Green River Formation is a layer of rock in Wyoming that contains possibly hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of finely stratified layers. Well, if you go to our museum, you can get that little glass thing with two pieces of glass and different colored sand in between. You flip it over and it makes dozens and dozens of layers in a matter of a few seconds. Well, when they dig through the Green River, they'll say, here's a picture of the Green River Formation. They'll say, oh, each of these layers is a different season, and they go by the pollen. They say there's certain pollen produced by trees in the spring. A different kind of tree produces pollen in the fall. And if you look at these layers, it's got the spring, fall, spring, fall, spring, fall. I mean, like maybe even 1,000,000 times. And they call them annual layers because of the pollen. Well, the truth of the matter is, all those things would sort very rapidly, just like the thing in our museum does, sorts things very rapidly. There's only two densities of colored sand in there, black and white, but it'll make 40 layers in a few seconds. Multiple layering, massive layering forms quickly. If you dig through this Green River Formation, you find layers of ash in there from apparently a volcanic eruption. As they drill down through the ash, they count the number of layers between the two ash layers, the number of layers of Green River Formation. And it's up to 35% difference in two different places. You drill one hole, you got 100 layers. You drill another hole, you only got, 60 layers. Why would that be? If those layers are really annual rings, then they should be consistent throughout the whole thing, and it's simply not. So get the article in Creation Magazine if somebody ever says to you the Green River Formation proves the Earth is millions of years old. It does not. A question that I get asked just about every week as I travel, what about the Bible codes? Is it true that there's a hidden code in the Bible, in the Hebrew? Well, there are all kinds of books that have been written about the Bible code question, and we'll cover those in a second, but let me give you the basic concept. Grant Jeffries has a great chapter, just one chapter, but in his book called The Signature of God, about this topic, the Bible codes. Here's the concept. If you take the Hebrew language, and only the Hebrew, and only the King James-backed Hebrew, by the way, and you put it in a computer with every single letter in a continuous string of letters, you can make like an acrostic, and by skipping letters, you end up with finding other words hidden in there. For instance, in every 13 letters in Deuteronomy chapter 10 spells out in the bitter sea of Auschwitz, the famous concentration camp for Adolf Hitler. Every 22 letters spelled out Hitler. Other phrases found in this passage were all kinds of things dealing with Adolf Hitler. How can that be? Not just in the text, but in the skipping of the letters. Are there hidden messages in the Bible? Well, I'm going to say this, I don't know, but I think so. I wouldn't be dogmatic on this. Chuck Missler, a good friend of mine, has a lot of stuff on this. He's got a great book called The Cosmic Codes, if you want to read about that. You say, who's Chuck Missler? Well, he worked for years as a cryptologist doing code work for the government. Okay? For many years, okay? He's in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, but he's got some good stuff on the Bible codes. You can get his website, khouse.org. Good stuff on Bible codes. These are some of the things found just in Deuteronomy and Numbers about Hitler. In skipping the letters, you find Hitler, Auschwitz, Holocaust, the Holocaust, crematorium, Poland, plagues, the Führer, Eichmann, king of the Nazis, genocide, Auschwitz, Germany, Hitler, Mein Kampf. I mean, it may be just a little more than coincidence that these things are hidden in there. There must be a reason for that. If you count in Proverbs chapter 30, every 22nd letter spells out Jesus. There must be something to it. Clear back in the 16th century, long before they had computers, one rabbi said the secrets of the Torah are revealed in the skipping of the letters. Here's an example of how it can work. Rips explained that each code is a case of adding every fourth letter to form a word. R, E, A, D. Read the code. You skip every 4 letters, there's a hidden message inside this sentence. That's what Bible codes is all about. Is there a hidden message inside the Bible? In addition to the message you're reading, is there something else in there? Well, I don't know. But in Genesis, if you skip every 49 letters, you can spell out Torah. Interesting. 49, 7 sevens. If you go to the book of Exodus and skip every 49 letters, you spell out Torah again, which is the Hebrew Old Testament, for God's Word, the Torah, okay? Every 49 letters. If you go to the book of Numbers and skip every 49 letters, you spell out Torah backwards. And if you go to Deuteronomy and skip every 49 letters, you spell out Torah backwards. Well, wait a minute. Genesis, Exodus spell it forward. Leviticus doesn't have it. Numbers, Deuteronomy spell it backwards. They're both pointing back to Exodus. Exodus, every 7 letters, spells out Jehovah, Yahweh. Could it be there, Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy are all pointing to the Lord? I mean, maybe that's just a pure coincidence, but I think the mathematical possibility of that is real close to 0. It's almost like there must have been something to it. The Torah always points to God. What does Adam mean? The Bible says Adam was the first man. What does Adam mean? Interesting question. I get that once in a while. The names in the Bible have very important meanings. God gave them those names for a very specific reason. Adam, Seth, Enos, Canaan. Well, Adam means man. Seth means appointed. Enos means mortal. Canaan means sorrow. Mahalalel means the blessed God. Jared means shall come down. Enoch means preaching. Methuselah means his death shall bring. Lamech means the despairing. And Noah means rest. So if you put it all together, man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down preaching that his death shall bring their despairing rest. Even the names in the Bible are trying to get a message across. Pretty amazing. Most folks who study English will tell you that English, German, and Danish have a common root language. There are hundreds and hundreds of words that are identical. Here's Beowulf poem in 518 AD. This is English, actually, from 1,500 years ago. Today's English is nothing like ancient English, and ancient English was very Germanic, okay? Spanish, Italian, French, and Latin had a common root language. You can compare the words. People that speak Spanish can go to Italy and get along pretty good. People that speak Ukrainian can listen to Russian and get along pretty good. A lot of languages have common roots. There's a good book about the Chinese language, The Discovery of Genesis, it's called. If you want to get one of these, it's, I forget, $10, $9. Showing how the original Chinese characters, not the ones they use today, but the original ancient Chinese pictograms were actually telling the creation story. For instance, the symbol for boat is 8 mouths in a vessel. Noah's Ark had 8 people on it. The Chinese symbol for garden is dust plus breath plus 2 people in an enclosure. There's also more in this book, Search for the Truth by Bruce Malone. A lot of his articles in here are really good and are on our website. You can read some of Bruce's articles, but this is also a good book you'd want to get on the topic. There's been a sequel, God's Promise to the Chinese, written about God's promise in the Chinese language. The Chinese symbol for righteous is a person under a lamb. The only way to be righteous is to be under the lamb. Their own words were telling them. By the way, we have a lot of that in English. And that would make a good sermon someday, too. We'll get another time on that. Today, there are about 1,200 recognized languages, plus thousands and thousands of dialects. They probably all broke up from the original 75 languages, just like, Australian, Irish, and Georgian, people from Georgia or Alabama. Believe it or not, they all speak English. But it's a different dialect of English, okay? And if it weren't for rapid communication across the world today, they would be totally indecipherable in a few generations. When we were in Australia, I was at the restaurant. I said to the waitress, I said, "Ma'am, would you get me a napkin?" The preacher said, don't say that. I said, "What?" He said, "Don't ask for a napkin over here. That's a diaper." I said, "What do I want?" He said, "You want a serviette." I said, "Oh, okay. Ma'am, can I have a serviette?" I thought I spoke English, They don't speak English over there. They speak Australian, all right? They did a search for Adam and Eve, trying to find, do we have a common ancestor? Using mitochondrial DNA changes, they found out we have a common ancestor only 200,000 years ago. One woman created this whole race, whole world. And then did more studies on this mitochondrial DNA and said, wow, no, we all have a common ancestor only 6,000 years ago. And they said, no, that can't be right. Let's keep studying. Well, yeah, actually, we did have a common mother 6,000 years ago, and I even know her husband's name. Okay, Adam, and a couple other kids' names. This article says, we all related to a man who lived in Asia, 1400 BC. Science correspondent in Weekly Telegraph in UK. Everyone in the world is descended from a single person who lived around 3,500 years ago, according to a new study. Scientists worked out the most recent common ancestor of all 6 billion people alive today probably dwelt in Eastern Asia around 1400 BC. Although the date may seem relatively recent, Researchers say the finding should not come as a surprise. Anyone trying to trace their family tree soon discovers the number of direct ancestors doubles every 20 years. How many of you have 2 parents? How many of you have 4 grandparents? How many have 8 great-grandparents? How many have 16 great-great-grandparents? I mean, you go keep going back, you got a whole bunch of folks in a hurry, right? Well, this creates a problem. And the article says, it takes only a few centuries to clock up thousands of direct ancestors. Using a computer model, researchers from the Massachusetts MIT attempted to trace back the most recent common ancestor using estimated patterns of migration through history, and they found out we all came from a common ancestor 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. What about the Ark of the Covenant? Apparently, Jeremiah took the Ark of the Covenant and the temple furniture from the temple outside the city. There's a tunnel called Jeremiah's Passageway that's caved in several spots. Richard Reeves, who worked with Ron Wyatt, has been working on this for years, digging out this tunnel. Some places are still open. But there's all kinds of tunnels under Jerusalem. I mean, there's another city under that city. Okay? And who knows what hasn't been discovered. But apparently they took the Ark of the Covenant and all this temple furniture outside the city wall, but inside the siege wall. Well, if you look at where that arrow is pointing, that is Golgotha, the place where Jesus was crucified. The garden tomb is right there. I was there a couple years ago. I'm going again in the spring back to Jerusalem. Oh, it's incredible. If you get a chance to go to the Holy Land, get over there. It's called the Place of the Skull. Jeremiah's grotto is now a place where they store bananas. A couple of Muslims own it, and they store fruit there to sell. But apparently in Jeremiah's grotto, all this, you can see at the Place of the Skull where they stoned Stephen, the garden tomb, the Gordon's Calvary. Jesus was crucified right there. He was buried just a short distance away in the tomb, and we get into more later on the crucifixion site. But Ron was digging in that area, Ron Wyatt, who died in '99, and you can get all of his discoveries from our ministry. There's only, I think, 2 people that sell his DVDs, him and us. $100 for his DVD series. It's phenomenal. If you want to watch, there's 5 DVDs, I think. Yeah. If you want to get all of Ron Wyatt's discoveries, you can see more about this. Just contact our ministry, $100 and get it. But Ron said he was digging outside there in Jeremiah's grotto area, and they found the crucifixion site. He covers it all on the DVDs. And they found this little cave. He had a Muslim friend working with him, helping him dig dirt. You know, he just paid this guy, Arab, to dig. He was squeezing down in this little hole, digging around, and he came out screaming, I quit, and left. So Ron went in there, and according to Ron, I talked to him for hours about it. And he said, Brother Hovind, if you told me this story, I wouldn't believe you, but it happened to me, and I know that all liars have their part in the lake of fire. I knew Ron personally. I think he was a good man. If I was God, I would let him find this kind of stuff because he wasn't looking for glory. He was looking to glorify God. So other people, other Christians, and even good friends of mine say, "Oh, Ron's wrong." He's, I get blasted for even mentioning Ron. And Eric, you and I, on our video series, Creation Science, Answering the Critics. We cover some of that in this DVD series. If you want to get all those DVDs about our answers to the critics. But Ron said he squeezed down in this little hole, and there's a little cave about 4 feet high, and he saw several things in there. As he looked around with his flashlight, he found, for instance, the table of showbread. The golden table that the Jews had built 3,000 years ago. Jeremiah hid that stuff in there, built a false wall in front of it. And there's this concrete box, like a concrete, but it's actually a rock, hollowed out. And when the lid was broken, according to Ron, he went over there and he looked at this lid, and he couldn't see in it because the ceiling's too short. But all over this lid was a black stuff like dried ketchup. It turned out to be dried blood, according to Ron. Right above the crack in the lid was a crack in the ceiling of this little short cave. That crack in the ceiling went all the way up to where Jesus was crucified, 20 feet straight up through solid rock. All this is according to Ron. I've never seen that. But there's other folks who say, yep, that's correct. I mean, I don't know, but it preaches good, at least. Apparently, Jesus died on the cross, and his blood ran right down onto the mercy seat, which is where the blood was supposed to go when there was a sacrifice. Because Jeremiah had stuck it there 600 years earlier. And the blood ran right down to the mercy seat. Now, Uzzah put forth his hand and touched the ark, and God killed him. So when Ron told the Jewish authorities, hey, here's your ark, they said, oh, we're not going to touch that. It's still there. Atheists occasionally ask the question, if the entire army of Pharaoh drowned in the Red Sea, why haven't we found any evidence? Where's the evidence for these guys drowning in the Red Sea? And it's a fair question, okay? Many atheists ask very fair questions, and it's time Christians be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh the reason of the hope that's in you. And I'm sorry this taping has gone so long for part 7, but there's a lot of questions that get asked. And we do many more on our radio series, radio program every day from 4:30 to 6 Central Time. You can call in on truthradio.com or drdino.com. But in Exodus chapter 14, God told Moses to go and camp by the sea. And it says they went across on dry ground and the waters were a wall beside them. It does not say they walked through a reed sea. There's some even liberal Christians that say, oh yeah, they just walked through shallow water. Well, then how did Pharaoh's army drown? You tell everybody, lay down, don't get up. Okay. I mean, come on. It was dry ground. And the Bible says God took off their chariot wheels. So what's the truth about the Red Sea crossing? It says the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen. If you look at the country of Egypt in the lower right-hand corner of this map, you'll see Egypt has the Red Sea right beside it. It comes up into two branches, the one on the left called the Gulf of Suez, where the Suez Canal is, the one on the right called the Gulf of Aqaba. Actually, there are two parts to the Red Sea. It splits right there around what's called the Sinai Peninsula, which, by the way, is not Sinai. No, Sinai is not there. But the children of Israel were leaving Egypt, and it took Pharaoh 3 days to catch them. They could not have crossed the Gulf of Suez. They went all the way across the Sinai Peninsula and crossed over there on the right at the Gulf of Aqaba. Right where that red dot is next to the Gulf of Aqaba is actually a beach. There's a dry riverbed that runs right up to that beach, and it's mountains on both sides and no escape any place. Certainly not with a bunch of people with their families, you know, kids and wagons and animals and stuff like that. You're not going to get up either one of those mountain ranges. This satellite view is kind of from the north, a little strange view. There you can see that beach right there. The children of Israel went out of Egypt at the far upper right and traveled all the way across the Sinai Peninsula and ended up stuck on that beach. That beach is huge. Those are little buildings, those little squares on there, actually warehouses and stuff. It's a monster beach, big enough to hold 2 or 3 million people, no problem. So here's the children of Israel stuck on the beach. They can't go north or south. There's mountains both ways. They can't go back. There's Pharaoh's army coming through the gap, and they can't go ahead. There's a Red Sea in front of them. So what do? Well, you cry and blame God for your problems. That's what everybody does, okay? God, I can't get out of this. What do? Dry riverbed where they came out. At the south end of the beach, Ron Wyatt years ago found a pillar right there. He pulled the pillar out, scrubbed it off, and set it up on concrete, and it was pretty badly eroded, but some of it was still legible. And it said in Paleo-Hebrew, apparently the pillar was erected by King Solomon, and it said, this is the pillar erected by King Solomon to commemorate the crossing of the Red Sea. Gilbert Vincent's a good friend of mine from Texas. He's been there a couple times. He got a bulldozer and helped stand it up straight and put more dirt around it because it was kind of leaning over. He climbed up to the top of it. Right there at where this beach is, it's about 8 miles across the Red Sea. Well, at that point, there's a shallow spot. The deep up toward the city of Eilat, where I was a few years ago, is about 5,000 feet deep on both sides. This whole Gulf of Aqaba is about 5,000 feet deep, except for right there. There's a shallow spot. I should probably say shallow. It's actually 900 feet deep. That's still pretty deep. But 900 feet over 8 miles is not bad. It's a gentle slope down, gentle slope back up. And if you go scuba diving down there, you'll see the rocks have been moved out of the way. Somebody cleared a path across the bottom of the Red Sea. Probably done by Moses and the people. The Bible says Pharaoh's army drowned trying to cross the Red Sea. The waters were a wall unto them. To walk 8 miles would take, half a day, with all the children of Israel pulling their wagons and everything else. At the bottom, according to Ron Wyatt, he went scuba diving down there and found human bones, horses' hooves, chariot wheels. Now, there's some controversy about the chariot wheels, but this is what appears to be a chariot wheel, gold-plated. They said you can't pick it up. It's a gold veneer because it just crumbles. The wood's rotted out. It's like chrome plating on a car. If you put a bumper in the water, let the bumper rust out, and just had the chrome, you couldn't pick it up. It would crumble, okay? But there are those who argue that's not legitimate. I don't know. But I'm just telling you what Ron told me, that there were real chariot wheels. When he took the pictures to the Antiquities Department in Egypt, they said, oh, wow, this is from the 18th dynasty. He said, how do you know that? They said, well, the 18th dynasty is the only one that used 4, 6, and 8-spoke chariot wheels, and all 3 were down there. So this was the same guys that chased Moses out of Egypt, the 18th dynasty. So that makes Mount Sinai over in Arabia, because remember they crossed the Red Sea and then they came to Mount Sinai? The Sinai Peninsula is not where Mount Sinai is. Mount Sinai is in Arabia. Right over there in that red section there is actually the holy precinct where Mount Sinai is. Galatians tells us Sinai's in Arabia. It says so in Galatians chapter 4. If Ron is right on all this, and I believe that he is, and you can see much more on his Discoveries series It's $100 for 5 DVDs. That's how they fund their ministry, to go back over there and do more research. Well worth getting. You can see this is apparently Mount Sinai. And there's video footage of all this. The top is still burned. Became a type of a volcanic glass like obsidian or something. It actually burned the rock. At the bottom, you can see the outline where the border was set up, because remember Moses told the children of Israel, don't come up onto the mountain, and they put it, but says they established a border. Well, the pillars are still there. There's also apparently the altar that Aaron made with a golden calf. They made the golden calf on the altar, but on the side of the altar, they drew a picture of a calf or cow. Still there. God told Moses to smite the rock and water would come out. Well, most of the Bible story picture books have, a little trickle of water coming out of a rock and somebody holding a cup. How are you going to feed or water 2 million people and their animals with a trickle of water coming out of a rock? That's a stupid idea. Some of them show a little bigger picture. Actually a little bigger picture of water. Actually, it's probably huge. A lot of folks think this is the rock that Moses smote. That rock sticking up on that mountain is 5 stories tall. 50 feet to the top of that rock, as tall as these trees around here. And it's split right down the middle. On both sides there are erosion marks. Water came pouring out of that rock. So you can see the video series for Ron if you want more on that. And Sodom also, he's got a lot of stuff on his website and on his video series about Sodom and Gomorrah. The Dead Sea in Israel has 5 spots along there that are just real high salt concentration and totally destroyed landscape. Ron says he found, and I believe him, Sodom, Gomorrah, Gera, Gaza, Admah, Leboam. These are the ones that the cities that were destroyed. You can read through Genesis chapter 14 and Deuteronomy chapter 29 to get more on this. But God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Apparently, Sodom and Gomorrah are right there along the south end of the Dead Sea, right by Masada. When I was up on top of Masada a couple years ago, you can look down and see this big square in the ground where apparently it used to be a city. This picture shows what looks like pilasters and towers of an ancient wall. Well, that's the way they built their cities back then. If you make it up over one wall, you got the enemy dumping arrows and hot oil and things down on you, from the second wall. Not a good place to be. We have sulfur balls. I've got some here on the table. These are actual sulfur balls from Sodom and Gomorrah. They smell like sulfur. They're 99.9% sulfur, and they're burned out. Okay? If you break them open, some are still yellow inside. Most of them are pretty badly burned. Some of them are bigger, like golf ball size, but millions of these sulfur balls are over there, right in that one area. It literally rained burning sulfur. So hot that it took the bricks of the city and baked it into ash. These sulfur balls specimens were tested by Michael Bonilla, a friend of mine up in New York. He said they were 97.4% pure sulfur when he had them tested. No place else in the world has these phenomena. We've got hundreds of them in our museum out here. Sulfur balls from Sodom and Gomorrah. Apparently, the cities were actually burned up. If you dig into the ash, it looks like just a cliff of ash. That's actually the old city wall. I mean, that was the brick. Under 2,600 degree temperature, it turned into ash, laminated. You can talk to Richard. That's Richard in the picture there, digging his finger into the ash. And there's sulfur balls in there. We've got one that apparently is a part of a human bone that was baked. It's in our museum, if you want to see that one out there. So I believe they found Sodom and Gomorrah, and you can check the Discoveries videos if you want more on that. Do wisdom teeth prove evolution? Well, Jack Cawazzo is a dentist from New Jersey. He spoke at our boot camp here last year. Some of you got to hear Jack speak. This book, Buried Alive, is great about the Neanderthals. And wisdom teeth are not proof for evolution. They're actually proof that man used to live longer and grow bigger. Today, 60% of Americans have trouble with their wisdom teeth and have to have them removed or have problems with them. 60%. Many other countries don't have problems with their wisdom teeth because they've got a coarser diet. And because of the rough stuff they chew and hard, raw vegetables and stuff, their wisdom teeth come in when they're 18 or 20 with no problem. Today, we have a softer diet. 60% have trouble. But evolutionists argue that wisdom teeth are proof for evolution when actually they're proof that man used to be living longer, maturing slower, and growing bigger. If you're getting bigger by the time you're 18 or 20, as your head enlarges, it's time for that last tooth to come in to fill in the back of the jaw. Not proof for evolution, just proof that man used to live longer.